Good morning to all of you. Thanks for having me on this important conference. I was asked to give you an overview of where we are with the Green Deal. Actually, I'm more interested in where you are with the research, because that is essential for making a Green Deal a reality, is that your research makes the right progress. But let's discuss that after my short introduction. In order to give you the full picture, I have to give you some context about the Green Deal and taking you back to a different era, which is pre-COVID, a completely different world, only 1.5 years ago, by the way. We presented the Green Deal before we even knew of the existence of COVID. And the Green Deal was different from normal environmental policies that you see dozens of coming from Brussels most of the time, in 3 ways. First, its ambition. For once, politicians didn't settle for the lowest common denominator. They didn't go for the feasible or the practical. No, we sat down and discussed what is the urgency of the matter itself, what is needed to save our ecosystem for future generations. Hence the target of 55% CO2 reduction in 2030, but more important, full climate neutrality in 2050, but also a target to stop the loss of biodiversity, and also an ambition to stop further pollution of our soil, our air, our water, because we've polluted enough. And those 3 targets, those 3 ambitions, are part of one plan. And that's the second difference from normal environmental policies, because normally you see a plan on transport, and then one on nature, and then one on fisheries, and then one on cars, and on windmills, all kinds of different plans, and most of the time some of them work against each other. This time we decided to design something different. One comprehensive, consistent plan to save our ecosystem. And come to think of it, there's nothing more logic than that, because there is only one ecosystem, and within that ecosystem everything is connected with each other too, as we now endure in this pandemic. And the third difference is the most important one. At least it proved to be the most important one. It wasn't an environmental plan. It was a growth strategy. It was an idea, a plan to put new momentum, new impetus in the European economy that is, let's face it, an aging continent. We are aging in terms of, ourselves, our buildings, our industry, and we need new momentum. We need new dynamic. We need new innovation. And the Green Deal provided for that. And then fast forward 3 months, our world was turned upside down. COVID changed everything we did and the way we did it. And I must admit that for a moment I despaired a little, because we've seen that before. And when finally politicians muster the courage to put a dot on the horizon, put a vision out there and say, okay, this is the way we go long term, all of a sudden something passes by that takes all the attention away, all the political capital, all the financial capital, and gone is your dot on the horizon. We've seen that before, a bit over 10 years ago, when Al Gore mesmerized the European public with his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And he even also convinced government leaders. I remember op-eds from Tony Blair in the Financial Times urging his fellow leaders in Europe to step up to the plate to fight climate change, because this was our moment, this was our time, etc., etc. And those plans were made. And then Lehman Brothers fell. And we haven't heard about Inconvenient Truth ever again. There was a second movie made. This time, it could have gone the same way. There's nothing more urgent, there's nothing bigger as an event, there's nothing taking everything away than COVID. But it didn't. Because after we settled ourselves from the health shock and the health crisis, we sat down and thought we need a growth strategy to fight Europe back from this corona crash. Well, our growth strategy was just presented. It's the Green Deal. And the good part of this story is, it's hard to say that's a good part about a COVID story, but the silver lining of this corona drama is that we didn't shelve the Green Deal because of this enormous event taking all the attention away. No, we put it on steroids. We now have the Green Deal and the Recovery and Resilience Facility, a 760 billion euro plan to build up a new economy in Europe. And we see that now rolling out all over Europe, except one small country that you happen to be in right now, the Netherlands. But 26 other countries went to work, delivered plans, and some of them are already rolling those plans out because they already received money. And a lot of those plans involve renewable energy. So next to the ambition of the Green Deal, and there was also some money connected to it, we now have an investment program to make the Green Deal a reality. And that investment program deals for at least 40% with Green Deal issues. And we think, guesstimated, a quarter of that or more is going directly into renewable energy, renewable electricity, including wind. And that's obviously where your challenge is, because for wind energy in Europe, and you've seen the strategies that we produced as part of the Green Deal, the offshore wind or the offshore energy strategy and others, wind needs to make a double triple, as we said here internally. A double triple meaning you have to triple the capacity before 2030 and triple it again towards 2050. And for offshore, it's a double quintuple. So you have to fivefold the installed capacity until 2030 and then fivefold it again until 2050. And that can't be done with current technology alone. We know that, and we've seen the enormous success of offshore wind in, let's say, shallow waters, especially designed, you could say, for the North Sea. That is that shallow bathtub that we happen to have in the middle of the biggest energy consuming part of the world, pretty conveniently allocated, but we can't stick to that development. We need to go beyond there to deeper waters, further offshore. And that's where you come in as a community of researchers, developers, innovators to make that happen. And I'm very optimistic that that's going to happen. And I've seen the proof. I mean, let's for a moment step back and look 10 years back at where offshore wind, the monopile offshore wind industry was at that time. I remember, because I was a member of parliament in the first decade of this century, being an environmental spokesperson, not the most important spokesperson of the parliament, so you had some time at hand. And when I remember vividly when the first license for an offshore wind farm arrived at our desk, license including a subsidy, I read the subsidy. It was a 16 cents per kilowatt hour, 16 cents per kilowatt hour, 160 euros per megawatt hour. You had, if you would calculate on the back of an envelope, that would cost the Dutch society about 300 billion in order to renew our electricity system if we would have to use 16 cents per kilowatt hour. And only 10 years after that first wind farm, we are in a situation where there's no subsidy needed. Within 10 years, and this is not about Google and not about Netflix, this is not about two smart boys in a garage, this is about huge piles of steel, huge blades, huge turbines, concrete, steel, making that, letting that go through that mind-boggling cost curve. That is nothing less than a revolution, and you did that. So I'm putting all my hopes on the next revolution, which will have to take place in the next 10 years. And when we talk about floating offshore, when we talk about integrating offshore wind, maybe even with offshore solar, maybe also with offshore hydrogen generation, maybe with some other stuff that I can't even think of, but you can, because that's your daily business. Know that every support that you need can be acquired from us in potential. Don't call me yet, but we stand ready to support you with our programs, with Horizon, with the Connecting Europe facility, with the RRF that I just outlined, and please, you have some chances to influence the Dutch, to still influence the Dutch RRF. So for the Dutch amongst you, you know what to do. There's 5.6 billion euros ready to be spent in the Netherlands on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, including renewable electricity, including offshore wind. I would know what to do. But all those plans, all those projects, all those instruments that we have can only bear fruit if you are successful. So instead of you looking at me, I'm looking at you with pleading eyes, and encourage you to keep up the good work. Go further along that mind-boggling cost curve and development curves. Go into deeper waters. Go into further areas from the shore, and try to make this Green Deal a reality. Thanks for your support, and I'm happy to answer all questions that you might have.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for this inspiring speech. And maybe as a first reaction, Mr. Samsom, you say that indeed that we need to tenfold the amount of wind power in Europe in the next years until 2050. And what we see from research perspective, that the current technology is simply not sufficient for the 2050 case. It would be silly to think that we in 2050 still have the same technology. And to just state we need to go further offshore, deeper waters, may seem simple, but we know that there's a lot of innovation power behind necessary. And what we see both from national, but also a little bit from the European side, is that wind energy is seen as maybe ready to roll out. It is being implemented. It are mega projects that are mostly done without cost overruns. They are almost subsidy-free, at least for near-shore shallow water. Can you reflect on this feeling that we sometimes have from the research perspective, that it is really difficult in some cases to find the proper and sufficient funding to do the work we want to do?
I think I recognize that. And you could summarize it as you're the victim of your own success. Because indeed, in some quarters of the public community, which is also the European Commission, there is that tendency to think, well, wind, including offshore wind, signed, sealed, delivered. There we are. We have to concentrate on other stuff. I can assure you that I and colleagues of mine spent the last year, including writing the offshore energy strategy, to turn that around and convince everybody within this community here that that is not the case, that wind should not be the victim of its own success, that it should actually profit from that success and be inspired and encouraged and financed to do even more than that. But I think what is needed is the first, let's say, inspiring, maybe even literally pictures, images of what is happening far out there offshore. You have one disadvantage, which is also the advantage, by the way. You can't see the stuff you're building right now. It's too far away. And what we need, and we are all human beings, also within the Commission, civil servants are still human beings, and working on those new projects, you need to be inspired sometimes. So I would encourage you to show off more, to show what you're doing, and tell that story, which is inspiring, on the next steps. I mean, the first floating offshore wind farms are now installed, and they seem to work quite well. Keep giving us that, keep feeding us with that information, and keep telling the story of what's next and what's needed. The same is for, as I explained, the integration of offshore wind and maybe even offshore floating solar, and maybe even the production of hydrogen. We hardly know what we're talking about here in this building, here in Brussels. You need to tell us. And that will lead to more inspiration, and that will lead to more innovative programs, including the finance that you need.
Thank you very much. And before I give the floor to questions in the room, so thanks for this reply, and it is very good to hear that we get the support. From our side, we are working now on some Lighthouse initiatives. So we are on 2 big initiatives which we want to combine the entire European research community in. We selected 2 really large topics: the system integration, so how to integrate all this offshore wind power in the energy system, and how to make floating wind just as successful as the bottom fixed offshore wind is currently. And we will make sure to send it to you. And I saw there is a question in the room. So,
unfortunately, you already asked it.
I asked it.
Yes. So this is Arno van Wingener, Fraunhofer Institute for Wind Energy in Germany. Hi, Mr. Samsom. Thank you very much for your inspiring presentation. It's a delight to actually hear a politician who knows what he's talking about. So that was very good. But in addition to Peter Eesen's question, I would like to say that it's not just a matter of enabling the European industry. It's also a matter of enabling the European research. And for that, the Lighthouse projects, which are not big demonstrators, but mainly a lot of necessary research to actually make those lofty plans for 2030, 40, 50 actually come true. And so I hope that if Peter Eesen sends you the Lighthouse projects, you will have a very careful look at it. Thank you.
Certainly. But let me understand you right. The Lighthouse projects that I know of are about floating large-scale energy system, are about floating offshore, and about energy system integration. Isn't that true, or are there more that I don't know of?
No, they are. But I mean, the thing is not that let's spend 15 million, 100 million, whatever, on building a huge concrete steel thing, but let's actually spend a similar research, similar deal of money, one time, on actually carrying out the research that's necessary for all that steel and concrete. The steel and concrete, I think the industry will have to provide.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe rephrase it a little bit in my own words. What we see is that the current projects are more demonstration kind of projects, so relatively high TRL, which is for the medium to short term. It's of course helpful to get the acceleration in place, which is also from climate perspective essential. But in addition to that, we see that after 2030 we will have to accelerate even further. And as research community that is working on the, let's say, lower to medium TRL, so technology readiness levels, we see that we also need, in that perspective, the preparatory work in that field in order to accelerate after 2030. And that was what Arno also said in a little bit different words. I have another question. I do not see anything online, so please, online, if you have questions, put them in the chat. But we also see that all the different countries have their own national energy plans, and of course that is more or less connected through the SETPlan implementation working groups, where the national representatives are active in a way. And we think that may also get some further traction and some further acceleration in that sense. Can you elaborate a little bit on what we could do and how can we connect to these efforts to really make a concise plan in Europe on the implementation of, in our case, offshore wind energy?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges that we have. A European Union consisting out of 27 members, all being a country and having their own sovereign abilities to finance their own energy systems and finance their own research. It's pretty hard to turn that into one project. We made a first step in our offshore energy strategy, and we are planning to make many more steps. And basically, if you look at offshore wind for a moment, we concentrate ourselves around the so-called 5 basins of where we have the potential. So that's not only the North Sea or the Baltic Sea that we all know of, but it's also obviously the Atlantic Ocean. It's the Mediterranean, and it's also the Black Sea. So we have 5 basins where we think offshore wind could take off, and in some instances it already took off. And we need to concentrate our efforts there and create a joint endeavor by the countries that are adjacent to those basins. For the North Sea, that means having Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and preferably also the UK, although that's now a new hurdle in our system because they're not part of the union anymore. But we have to make them work close together. Well, fortunately, we're not starting from scratch here. There is already such a cooperation ongoing, but it needs to be extended because we also need to find ways to have cross-border projects not suffer from what they suffer from right now, which is 2 types of energy subsidy regulation, 2 types of energy integration regulation, 2 types of system operators requirements, everything multiplied by 2 or sometimes even by 3 if you're dealing with 3 countries. And we need to get rid of that. And we aim to come forward with new adapted rules in order to make those hybrid projects the new standard. And the same goes for innovation and research. Obviously, our Horizon work is already leading towards cooperation on between countries, because that's a prerequisite to get that Horizon money. But we can do more on that, and we are committed to work further into that field, because you can imagine that once you go further out there on the Atlantic Ocean, there's not just a few countries involved. The whole of the Union is profiting from that energy and might be cooperating to get that energy floating in this case. And that would mean that the Union as an entity is setting up new energy projects. Would be completely new compared to the current situation where there's countries maybe in cooperation with others, but it's countries doing the work. But I do not exclude a future in which this continent is doing the work, because the energy issue, the energy challenge is one that you can only address on a continental scale.
Thank you very much. I see that we have 2 questions from the audience online, from Mikkel Iribas Latour and Greg Arrowsmith, and they mainly aim at the same thing. So what has been noticed is that the NECPs, more or less neglected, in the words of the questionnaire question maker, the research, the R&D efforts in wind energy. And Nicole asked what we can do in order to better present the research challenges to the European Commission. So I think that would be the question. So how can we still make sure that we pose the priorities to the right persons in the right direction?
On your first remark about being neglected in the NECPs, it's not completely true, but I see the gist of your grievances, because indeed the NECPs are mostly about getting the megawatts done. So it's most about the high end of the value chain where you build those windmills and solar panels, by the way, because it's about more than one type of renewable energy. But it's not so much about research, although a few of those plans do address it. But we have observed the same tendency. I don't think national research or pushing countries to do more national research is going to make the biggest difference. As I said earlier, this is a continental challenge. So you need to be in Europe, you need to be with Horizon, and we need to pool that money together, join it with co-financing from national member states, and then you have the size and also the cooperation that you need. And if you find any trouble in getting through in the European Commission, you can count on EVP Timmermans, my cabinet, and me to find the right ways for you. So don't hesitate if you have anything that you endure in your search for funds in the European Commission. Mail me, contact us in our cabinet, because it's our job to make this a reality.
Thank you. From the room, are there other questions? Then, if I may, are you still available, or?
I'm available for 1.5 minutes.
Then maybe I'd like to make let's say another announcement to you, Mr. Samsom, is that you were talking about these multidisciplinary activities, and what I would like to say is that we see also in research that it becomes multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, because we need to go to sustainability, but also recyclability and circularity. And but I really like to thank you a lot for joining us in this annual event, and I really appreciate your openness and frankness in this discussion. And I would like to a big hand of applause, and hope to see you again.
Thank you very much.